as we go forward, but we are gonna start recording. And then I'm gonna invite Valeria to make her presentation, and I can give you the clicker.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. So as I say, my name is Valeria Pizarro. I am, let's see if you just can use the names. With the Paris Institute for Marine Science. And I'm gonna to you. Yeah, it works. Okay. This coming. Okay, this is me. The first one there. Sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna give like a really brief overview of what is happening in Caribbean coral reefs. I'm gonna focus mainly on the areas that I work, is the Bahamas and Colombia. And of course, many of the things that have been on the news the last couple of. Okay, so I don't think that I have to really explain what is coral reefs, but the main thing of this slide is just like to remind everyone that ecosystem services is actually what we care about coral reefs. We love them, they're beautiful, but the services that they provide to us and to all the communities that just like depend on them is the main thing that we care for. We should care for. But corals are complex. So corals, they're animals, they're the main builders of coral reefs, but they do have a very complex microbiome. So these interactions with the environment just either have like very healthy animals or with factors that can threaten these symbiosis, then we will have a lot of issues. And one of the main issues that we're facing now is having a lot of coral diseases, and the Caribbean is what is known as the hotspot of coral diseases. In the last 50 years, we have just seen like from 1 or 2 coral diseases that we had probably in the 70s. Now we have about 18 to 20. And our last nightmare is known as stony coral tissue loss disease. And it's our latest nightmare because it's killing corals very quickly. This is an image, so you will have on your right panel just the same photos from the right to the left. So this is a reef in Grand Bahama, a shallow, about 2-3 meters depth, where brain corals used to dominate. And what we have here in your left panel is all the brain corals that were alive with some of the disease in 2020, and then we went 1 year later, and most of the corals, as you can see here, so you can see them outlined in red, they were almost gone, and we went back last year. There is no brain corals left in this area. So in the Bahamas, we decided to just make a calculation from different things to see like how many corals have we left since the beginning, the spread of the disease in the area. And we had the disease that actually show up for the first time in 2014 in Florida and arrived in the Bahamas in 2019. And we just said like, okay, how many corals have we lost? And we think that we have lost about, if we take into account all the reef areas in the Caribbean, more than 10,000 million corals. And these are really big numbers, but if we really think how it's going, we have been losing more corals than we think. I don't know if anyone that is here have faced this disease, but when you go to places, like coral communities have changed so much that you cannot recognize what was there if you haven't been there before. The other threat that we are facing, of course, is coral bleaching, and this has been an issue for the last couple of decades, but right now it's been even the worst. I have here just the marine heat wave that we have in 2023, and if you saw the news in the last few days, right now we are facing another marine heat wave even worse than last year. And this is what we usually use to when we want to see, like, monitor how coral reefs are doing in terms of bleaching. We go to NOAA and they tell you, okay, this is your stress heat weeks that you have for the corals. And this time was the first time that we really faced like having not only the disease but coral bleaching, and especially in the first 10 meters, we just face the loss of the corals that weren't affected by the disease. We lost about 90% of shallow corals between within the 5 meters. So the potential implications of this is, of course, we will have just populations that are not in the right size to be able to reproduce. So we will have, and we are seeing it with some species, local extinctions for many actually with them. And the interaction with bleaching will be even worse. We are facing the major shift in coral communities that we have seen since the 80s. And this, of course, is going to just result on the loss of coral reef services. But we do think, and that's what actually after all this really bad news is what gives us some hope, or just like something that we can study and work with. So one of the things that we do is the use of photomosaics in different areas. Like in the Bahamas, we have about 250 photomosaics all around the Bahamas. And with this, we have been able to identify what corals are resilient or resistant. And the idea is that we can work with those to develop coral restoration programs through larval propagation or microfragmentation, and start to use as well other means. So we are going to have a rescue facility as well that we can use as a gene bank to produce new babies, and hopefully they will be resistant and resilient to both, hopefully, coral bleaching and stony coral tissue loss disease right now, until we have a new disease coming and affecting coral reefs. So this is one of the photos that we took last year during the peak of our bleaching event in the Bahamas. And as you can see, we have a Copra palmata that is completely bleached, just alongside of a healthy coral. And we went back this year, and this healthy coral is still there. So this is one of the things that we know that there is hope, even if it's a small one. And of course, what we need to do is we need to do more research. We are working as well developing probiotics to try to enhance all the resistance of corals and to see if it affects the fitness. So we want to sample, we want to identify different resilient corals. We need to analyze the data, identify the solutions, do some experiments, and apply this in a large scale. That is one of our current barriers in coral reefs. And I'm gonna finish with that so we can have more room for discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Valeria. And now we have a presentation online. I think Dr. Davis is going to be presenting, and you will just let me know when I need to click for the next slide. Please go ahead.
Morning, everyone. Thank you and welcome to the Coral Pavilion. Thank you to the coordinators for allowing my virtual participation. I am Dr. Ancilleno Davis. I own the Science and Perspective brand, and I'm an assistant professor of environmental science and sustainability at the University of the Bahamas North in Freeport, Grand Bahama. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for me, sustainability can fall into 3 arenas. Social sustainability supports our human systems, education, culture, community building. Economic sustainability treats our tradable and marketable resources with respect and uses them in ways that allow them to gain value over time. Environmental sustainability protects the resources that occur in our natural environment in a way that the services they provide are not diminished over time. So future generations can have fishable oceans, arable land, and breathable air. Sustainable capacity building means connecting the three of these arenas and delivering on the shared priority that allows us to be successful as communities and also as individuals. Next slide, please. So social capacity includes educating the local legislative bodies and enforcement agencies on the science that identifies and describes the world that our laws impact. The science can evaluate our natural system, and it can be used to establish these regulations for management and protection of species like coral reefs and the coral reef fishes. But conversely, the laws can guide, mandate, or restrict our scientific activity at various scales. Now, it's my belief that science can be conducted in any system, and anyone can use more science, but we need more perspective to apply the scientific knowledge in appropriate ways. And diversity within the scientific community supports this perspective building. The inclusion of local people and organizations in equitable scientific communities help the truth to be better represented. And a fundamental tenet of social sustainability in science is the open access to scientific knowledge, education, and especially that knowledge of your own marine and terrestrial environments. Our communities require support for the small voice out on the sea every day to have a space at the table with the scientists who are describing the environment and the politicians who are drawing the boundaries in their world. The scientist in this image, she's on the left in the center image, and she's on the right image taking care of some corals. She is Alana Velicott, and she's an international climate and coral advocate. She's a scientist, actress, model, and community leader. But she started off as a student who we trained in how to propagate corals, and now she is one of the guiding forces behind Coral Vita here in the Bahamas on Grand Bahama Island. Next slide, please. Now, economic capacity building includes determining what physical and human resources are truly necessary for the accomplishment of our sustainability goals. Money is not a resource, not really. It's a tool for us to translate between resources. So what we actually need to do is determine, what do we need? How big of a boat do we need to serve a coral reef? How many of those boats do we need for each island or each nation? How many divers do we need trained? And for those divers, how many sets of dive gear do we need? How many reefs can we assess in a given area and over a given period of time? How many how many hours does it take to assess the reefs that we have? Today, many of our local communities still rely on borrowed boats, borrowed scientists, and they can only do research for the time that those scientists can spare and only while the funding lasts. Because to be honest, science and conservation has not invested much in the communities as opposed to investing in the projects. And we really need to work on this and change this. In these images, on the top left is one of the first coral propagation units in the first coral nursery in the Bahamas that we built. And then on the top on the right is a demonstration coral tree at the Coral Vita Coral Farm. And the lower image is an image of one of Prince Khalid bin Sultan's boats that came to the Bahamas during the Global Reef Expedition and allowed us to visit really far-flung areas of the Bahamas that otherwise we would not be able to access or to survey. And all that dive gear and the extreme luxury of being on that research vessel is really different from what we typically have access to. Next slide, please. So when we get to the environmental capacity, our questions that we have to answer are, where and when will this research be done? Whose country do we work in? Whose schedule do we follow? And do we focus on individual corals, species, or reefs? And these are big scientific questions that we're challenged to answer regularly. But when it comes to the humanity of it, human beings are who we're protecting the environment for. Do we regulate their individual behavior and restrict how often people conduct science, how they can use the environmental resources? Or are we going to focus on organizational policy, make sure that our legislators are focusing on the needs of the people, that our organizations are doing science in the correct way, the ethical way, involving the community? Or are we focusing on legislation at levels where the typical Bahamian or Colombian or Cuban is not necessarily directly affected in their individual day-to-day life, but maybe guiding things in a general direction towards sustainability? I don't have the answers to these, but perhaps through the discussion we'll get closer. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to consider the role of the university, and this is still being developed. We have an environmental science degree that is being developed now, and we're working on sustainable policy and standards at the University of the Bahamas, where we encourage our scientific community to work with the university and our university students so that our students that are passionate about the environment no longer leave the university and leave the country to pursue their education about the Bahamas in a different location. We're encouraging student research where students can participate a little bit better in the activities that we have going on with regard to research at various levels. So not just having students carrying equipment and just recording the notes, but actively engaged in determining what the questions are that need to be answered, and in data analysis and making connections between what the science says and what their knowledge of their community says. And sometimes those are two different things, but we need to get them together because at the end of the day, you cannot protect an environment without the support of the community. Next slide, please. So finally, all of that is to say that we have a lot of conversation to have. We have a lot of communities to connect. We have students, professors, researchers, and community leaders to connect and bring into these spaces. It's a challenge for us to to all join in one space. And even today is an example of it. I'm joining you from the Bahamas virtually, and I have to make priority choices for my interaction here in my community versus attending higher level talks and interactions. But this is one of those opportunities that we can share, and I'm looking forward to the discussions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. And what I will do is I'll ask Tom to help queue up the next presentation, which is Dr. Kennedy's presentation, because unfortunately Kendall isn't with us. And while we do that, I can tell you a little bit about the work that Kendall was going to present on, which was funded through the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, and really was about coral restoration on Grenada's east coast. The idea was to think about species diversity and creating resilience in the face of all the issues you've already heard mentioned in terms of bleaching. And he was going to speak to what he's learned on the topics that were mentioned by both Dr. Davies and his own experience, which is working with not only community groups and engaging them and having them involved, but also working with the governments of the countries and making sure they understand the priority that coral reef work and restoration should play in what they're doing and their biodiversity goals. So unfortunately, he's not with us, but we do have his presentation and you will have it in the package and on the slides that are online. So I hope that you will be able to catch it from there and he should be around in the next. Hopefully you'll join us by the end for the discussion and we can catch up there. And with that, hopefully I've bought the time for Dr. Canty to get ready. And I'm happy to hand over to you. I think that mic is working. Yes.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you to all my Smithsonian colleagues who drowning me out here. One thing I wanted to say just before I start, I really enjoy serving on the EVA facility. It's a shame we couldn't see the last presentation. There's been some great work in looking at coral reef restoration, but also mangrove restoration, and that's sort of what I'm here to champion as well. And so what I'm looking at here and thinking more broadly, corals super important, give a lot of ecosystem services to coastal communities, which we've heard from our two colleagues before. But we need to be thinking broader. Corals are not isolated, they are entwined with other ecosystems. And the other thing is when we take a seascapes approach, we include people. All of the colleagues so far have also talked about that, but people are part of this solution. They're also part of the problem, but there are things that we can do at local levels, national levels to work together for solutions. And just a little bit more about, there's some sort of 5 key points around seascapes, and that coastal areas are ridiculously dynamic. There are a patchwork of all different types of habitats and all different types of users and stakeholders. We really need to get that into our heads as we come through and think about what the solutions are. And with that, we need to know what was in the past, what we have now, and where we're heading to in the future, especially when we're thinking about bleaching events. Hurricanes, are we doing resilience? Are we doing adaptation? Are we doing mitigation? Where are we within that? And what are we restoring towards? All of these ecosystems provide these ecosystem services, but they sometimes provide slightly different ones in different areas. And so understanding where those ecosystem services are is also critical. A big thing too is that fish, major thing for food security and livelihoods in this region of the Caribbean. And these fish use these habitats at different life stages. So we can't just think of corals, we have to think of all of these other habitats and the life stages of fish. And together, these ecosystems have massively positive and additive effects. So if we just focus on one, we don't get all of the benefits that we need. So no matter how much we want to say, no coral reef is an island, they are heavily connected. And unfortunately, we have 2 lesser sung heroes of seagrasses, beautiful, but actually the most beautiful, mangroves. We cannot ignore the fact that these 2 systems with coral reefs give more than the sum of their parts together. And there's been some great research coming out of showing how the 3 of them, the power of 3, the additive resilient effects to climate change, to coastal communities is ridiculous. Like, it's so much higher. So we can't just think of coral reefs. We have to think of all 3 of these systems together. And so there's this connectivity, fish are moving through, nutrients are moving through, but there's also, wave abatement, erosion control. So these kind of things, looking at this connectivity, how do we keep this? And these are things that our group is really trying to look at and saying, okay, corals, there's been a lot of attention to them. How do we bring seagrasses and mangroves up to that level? And how do we make sure that we're not doing it alone, that we're doing it with our coral reef friends? One way to do that, and a key piece has been looking at the fisheries, and we're doing more and more work with eDNA to try and find out where fish are within the mangroves and the seagrasses because of these life cycle movements up and down these systems. So trying to wow you with some beautiful photos rather than listening to me. But, and a big piece, so when we're thinking management too, management is focused on adult fish on the reefs. We need to change that. We need to be thinking juvenile fish in the mangroves, in the seagrasses. The other piece of that too, when we only focus on fishing on these reefs, we're also thinking more about the men and the active role that men have on the reefs. We forget where the women are. The women are generally in the mangroves and the seagrasses. They have more access to those areas. They can do that in between other sort of domestic duties, taking care of the kids, etc. So you can go to the seagrasses and mangroves and come back, prepare these things, and then but still have a really important role in food security and other parts of the household income. And so when we think of the seascape, we're now bringing in more inclusivity. We're thinking greater equity in how we manage these resources because we're thinking holistically about the ecosystems in general, but also about all of the different stakeholders. And so just thinking about these threats and moving through, fishing is still one of the major threats to coral reefs, and we still have to do something about that. So what are we going to do? How can we do this? We need to get better management of our fisheries in. That can be through protected areas. That's our 30 by 30 targets. How do we get there in a net sustainable way? Thinking about all genera or all genders even, and just really be thinking through how do we do this? It can't just be highly protected. It can't all be that. It has to be other effective conservation measures and also the management outside of the protected area. There's a big focus on getting us to 30 by 30, and those are really key goals. But how do we manage fisheries outside of those areas? The protected areas can't do it all. But if we've got fish on the reefs, fish will produce a lot of great energy. They have high levels of function on the reef, especially our parrotfish, help keep our algae off. So the corals are more resilient. If we have more resilient fisheries, we have more resilient reefs, more resilient seagrasses and mangroves, and therefore we have more resilient communities. And that's a big piece of why we're thinking more and more about what our communities are doing and thinking about how do we engage our communities in taking active roles in the stewardship of their own resources. And then the other big one that's sometimes a bit of an elephant in the room because it's so difficult to deal with, but it is something that we can deal with at the local level. It's nitrogen pollution. So this is a map of the Mesoamerican Reef region, an area shared by Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. We mapped 430 watersheds. Two of these watersheds are responsible for over 50% of the pollution, and over 90% of the pollution comes from agriculture. So there are ways and means to take this stress off. And if we can remove some of the pressures of pollution, some of the pressures of fishing, then when the stony coral tissue loss disease comes through, we're
Talking about the coral disease here in Colombia, I see there are people growing some corals, trying to grow some corals. Is there any way that they can protect those from the disease, or is you cannot do anything about it?
So with the cerebral tissue loss disease, there are highly susceptible species, and so those are the ones that usually go really fast. So there is a unique coral, there is a pillar coral, and that one that was already rare with just all around the Caribbean has been just like disappearing, and some other species they're locally extinct due to the disease. So all these projects that we have in different places in Colombia and the Caribbean, because coral restoration is actually started in the Caribbean and is really big happening here. The ones that work with susceptible species, if they haven't identified resistant colonies, they would probably have a lot of mortality. So what we usually do in areas like Mexico, they're doing it in Mexico, they're doing it in Dominican Republic, like in the Bahamas, is identifying which of these corals have been surviving during the spread of the disease. Like the disease has been there for 3, 4, 10 years, and you work with those ones that have been resistant. In Colombia, we only have the disease in the archipelago of San Andres, Flores, and Santa Catalina, so it hasn't reached the continental reefs. So we will face that sooner than later.
All right, thank you. We will have a full panel discussion coming up in a couple of minutes, but since everybody is still on that side, I will ask Tom to bring up Fabian's presentation. And then we will have those two presentations before the panel discussion. So I get to boast a little bit. Fabian is with the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, actually with our conservation finance program, and Tanya, our program manager, is here. But he is also a coral reef expert and has kindly stepped in for the ecosystem-based adaptation facility team, and will make the presentation on the work that we have been doing on a coral health forum. The idea being some of the discussion that Dr. Davis mentioned, and that has been said about building the local capacity and the sharing of knowledge, and how important it is for us to make sure that we are talking together and not just in our separate countries on the work that's happening. So I hand over to Fabian to present, and then right after that, we will have a presentation from Tom and Ikri, and then we will have a full panel discussion. Fabian?
Thanks, Karen. Shall I use the mic or?
Yes. Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Karen mentioned, I'm Fabian Kine. I'm the technical officer for the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. So I have a short presentation to give on some of our thinking around collaboration across the different projects and initiatives that we're involved in. So a little bit of background. CBF is an umbrella environmental fund with a flexible structure to implement innovative solutions for resilience and mobilization across the Caribbean. So we operate through a range of different financial instruments, and we work through 3 core programs. The first is conservation finance. We also have a climate change program, which I'm speaking towards today, and a nature-based economies program. We currently manage in the region of about $200 million US, and we work through a group of national conservation trust funds. So I'm sure you may have heard across the conference, you know, us speaking towards that collaboration and support with the CTFs that form this Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture. Just a little bit more about the EBA program. So the EBA facility is part of the climate change program, and it allows CBF to distribute grants locally, nationally, and regionally to projects using competitive pool proposals. So we've done 3, 4. So we've done 4 very successful call for proposals. We have another one out at the moment. So I invite you to, if you have any questions, if you'd like information, the call closes in December of this year. So, and the focus of it is to sustainably manage ecosystem-based adaptation and support those critical marine and coastal habitats, including the rehabilitation of key biodiversity areas, and of course, including, like Dr. Davis was speaking about, is the inclusion of social and economic resilience to climate change. So, we've been speaking with the other speakers about the significant stresses that coral reefs are facing, particularly, after these recurrent mass bleaching events triggered by unprecedented high sea surface temperatures, the stony coral tissue loss disease that has completely decimated reefs. I was based in Belize for a few years, and I just saw from when it first started appearing in 2019 to where we are now, just complete decimation. But we want to talk about opportunities here and to find solutions. And I think what we realized through the EDA program is that we have a wealth of knowledge of practitioners who are on the ground, who are on the front lines, who are seeing these issues day to day, and there's an opportunity for sharing, for exchanging of ideas and finding solutions to these. So we started this conversation back in a workshop in the Dominican Republic back in 2023, and launched the idea of a community of practice, specifically focused on the Caribbean, with our EBA grantees, but also opening that up, for a much more broader conversation around this. So the objective of the Caribbean Coral Health Program, which we're launching today, and we're sharing more with you all today, is to provide a space for those working on these issues to discuss and share experiences on coral issues. And yeah. Okay, next slide. So it's a relatively new forum. So it was conceived back in 2023. We started, scoping the idea, sending an email out to beneficiaries, collaborators back in January, and we got we got a strong support back of expressed interest. So we started drafting a concept note. We put a questionnaire out to start to get an idea of the target audience, the key objectives, and really where we could direct our efforts for this. And we wanted to keep it simple, so we just started with a very basic WhatsApp group and newsletter to keep communication flowing. We recognize we don't want to. There's a lot of different networks out there, so we want to be complementary in how we support. And the objective of the group is to collaborate and amplify the needs and priorities of the network. And just to give you an example, this side event is a direct result of this collaboration. So this is just a couple of slides on some of the questionnaire that came back to us, so the results of the questionnaire. So this is giving you an idea of the relationship of the different respondents. So we have beneficiaries from the EBA project, partners from applicants and others. But when we received the information, we realized that we wanted to open it up and really be inclusive in this conversation. Again, this is another slide that speaks to the different memberships across the coral reef space, which helps us, there's the top 3 are of course ICWI, co-host of this event and Reef Resilience Network, Global Coral Reef Alliance. And we just want to make sure that we're connecting the dots and being complementary in our support for specifically for practitioners in the region. I'm sure it comes to no surprise that when we canvassed the network about the main coral health issues, bleaching and stony coral tissue loss disease were top of the list. And there is a multitude of different threats that we're facing, and what we hope is that working through economies of scale, we want to be able to collaborate and support. But the EBA project wants to be able to support interventions that address various priorities. And then just to give you an idea, we're working across the region, both in the insular Caribbean and of course the wider Caribbean and those contributing countries. So I think there's a great opportunity here to, with a wealth of knowledge, to connect and support multi-country projects and interventions at national and regional level. So in terms of next steps, I invite you, if you haven't already, to please sign up. The information is a QR code on the screen. Like I said, we're just keeping it simple, so we'll just start with a WhatsApp group and a quarterly newsletter to provide information about upcoming events, opportunities, funding opportunities, ways and means to collaborate. And we hope to work with you to make this a really meaningful conversation and support. CBF is committed to supporting work in the region to really improve the resilience of coral health across the Caribbean. So thank you for your time. Willing to take any questions. And yeah, willing to go.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruben. Thanks, and just to add that one of the things that this health forum does is create an opportunity with the funding that we have for the EBA facility. We are limited in where we can provide funding in terms of the countries we can work in. So this is a way for us to branch out and reach. You saw some of the overseas territories. One of CBF's targets is to really reach out and involve the overseas territories in some of our Caribbean biodiversity work. That's hard with some of the donors we are working with. So it is one of the ways to really at least have that knowledge base that we can count on across the region. With that, we have the final presentation from Thomas Dallison from ICRI, who will be presenting a little more on the global coral reef monitoring network. And while he comes up, just to note that we are, of course, as Vivian said, making sure that we are complementing what we are doing with the work of GCRMN and others. Thank
you. Thank you very much, Karen, and pleasure to be here and welcome you all here. I noticed a few people left, but they normally leave after I finish speaking, not before, so but we'll keep going. But firstly, before I delve into this, I just wanted to thank you all for being at the Full Coral Pavilion hosted by ICRI and made possible with our sponsors and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund being one. I know your time's precious, but giving your time for coral reefs is equally important and much appreciated. So,
pardon me, Tom. Could you share your screen again to the Zoom, please?
No problem. I will present and be tapped. You can see the presentation?
I can now. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, as mentioned, so my name is Tom Dallison. I'm the Strategic Advisor to the International Coral Reef Initiative Secretariat, and I'm also leading the data collection process for the next global status report for the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. So I'm just going to provide you with a quick overview of ICRI and then delve a little bit further into the GCRMN, what we're doing, why it's important, and importantly, how you can contribute to understanding the status and trends of coral reefs. So for those of you that aren't aware, ICRI is a global partnership ranging from coral nations and general countries all the way down to sort of local level organizations. And we're actually founded in 1994, announced at the first CBD COP. So this is actually our 30th birthday this year, and an excellent way to celebrate it with you all in the pavilion. From those 8 founding nations, we've now moved and sort of transcended to over 100 members, which includes 45 countries. So when we look at sort of the breadth of the initiative, those countries actually account for over 75% of the world's coral reefs. We're currently chaired by the US, currently implementing our 2021 to 2024 plan of action. However, in September this year, at our 37th general meeting in Jeddah, the membership approved a proposal from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to take on the chair for the next 3 years. So as of January, we'll be chaired by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And one important point that I really want to emphasize is that the GCRMN, the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, is a network of ICRI. So they're not 2 separate entities, they are paired together. So we can use the GCRMN to support ICRI and support countries. So in terms of ICRI's work in where we are, quite topical in terms of COP16. So as I mentioned, we were announced at the first CBD COP, and then since then, ICRI has had a really strong relationship with the CBD. We had a dedicated technical working group on the post-2020 process in terms of developing indicators to support countries to integrate them into their global biodiversity framework. And following this agreement, and now we know sort of NBSAP, so the main mechanism, ICRI is ready to support countries in implementing their NBSAPs, as well as releasing guidance for integrating coral reefs into NBSAP. So in order for ICRI to be able to support countries at the sort of in the international agenda at the sort of policy level, we need to have a good understanding of coral reefs at sort of the local level and spatial and temporal scales. And this is where the GCRMN, or the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, comes into play. So for those of you that may be aware and may have read, the main sort of products of the GCRMN are the status of coral reefs of the world global reports. And since its establishment in 1995, we've released 6 global reports, and the latest one being the one that you can partly see here, but it's the status of coral reefs of the world 2020, which was released in 2021, which the headline stat was that we'd lost 14% of the world's coral on the world's coral reefs from 2014 to 2019. We don't only do global reports, we also do regional reports as well. The most recent being the status and trends of East Asian coral reefs, which was released a couple of years ago. But excitingly, next year, the Pacific Regional Report and the Caribbean Report will be released. And we were talking, I think, Steve, we were talking about the importance of value of fish when we're looking at considering not only coral reefs, but everything else around mangroves and seagrasses. The Caribbean region is going to be the first region to try and tackle fish data at a regional scale. Although I'm leading the data placement present, I'm not the statistician. So fortunately, it's okay for me, but I know it's an absolute headache. So that's exciting for that to come out as well. So I always like to highlight this because whilst we're inundated with reports and guidelines that are constantly released, in order to protect something, we need to understand where it is and its status and its trends. And the 2020 report was the first global analysis at a quantitative level. The previous reports were more qualitative, just describing what was happening. In the 2020 report, we took a data set of over 2 million observations, compiled them all together from 1978 to 2019, and looked at the status and trends at the global, but also at the regional scale. And as I mentioned earlier, the 14% result was the headline sort of stat that was pulled out. But in terms of the value of and algae. And in this one, we'll report on macroalgae, turf algae, and coralline algae, recognizing the different functional roles that they play. We're also going to ideally bring in marine protected areas and other sort of drivers and pressures to build into the predictive model to understand their true sort of their influence on the data and the world's coral reefs. That data collation process is happening to the end of the year. Next year is the data analysis, and then the production and launch in 2026. So we've got quite a road ahead of us in collecting all of those data. And I do just need to say that this work is supported from the government of Monaco and the government of Sweden. So, although the deadline is the end of the year, we have been quite busy in collating data. So where are we at the moment? So the black line that you can see in the middle of the screen, that's the amount of data that was for the 2020 report. So anything above that line, we've exceeded the amount we received for 2020. Anything below, we've still got data gaps. So you can see Australia, Brazil, and the Arabian Gulf have massively exceeded what we received 5 years ago. But we do still have some gaps in data. So we can see we've got some gaps in the Caribbean, Eastern Tropical Pacific, South Asia, and the Western Indian Ocean as well. Not to say that those data don't exist, and we're working with the regional coordinators to try and obtain those data. But as you can imagine, collecting all these data can be quite challenging and time. When we place that into a spatial map, we can sort of see that distribution. This was very different last month. There was a lot of blue last month. So over the last 30 days, we've made significant progress, but you can see where sort of those gaps are. And why am I showing you this? Because also we have built a interactive map. And really the interactive map allows you to delve in and see where you may have data and understand if those data have been contributed. There is a QR code on the screen, but it's hidden. So around the room, there's plenty of QR codes, and there's a big GCRM window at the back. So scan that QR code, go on the website, click on the interactive map, and then pretend that you're there with me. Okay, so all these dots here are all the data that we have. Down in the bottom, you can see yellow is the sort of 1 year timestamps, and it goes all the way to data sets which are extending 15 years. Obviously, the higher the timeline, the more preferred, but we have no prejudice around data. So if you have data that is just from 1 year, you can contribute that to the GCRM. So what the interactive map allows you to do is zoom in to specific locations. So as we are in Colombia, I thought I'd take a look at Colombia. So compared to other regions, especially in the Caribbean, Lesser Antilles, you can see that Colombia doesn't have that much data at the moment. So for Colombian colleagues in the room, if you have data, please do send it over to us. You have a little bit of a shorter deadline until the end of November if you want it in the Caribbean report. So please do go and check this interactive map, zoom in. Even if you don't have data, you may be aware of expeditions that have happened or where data have been collected, and then please contact either myself or Jeremy Rickard, who's involved, he's the data man. I'm getting the data, the policy diplomacy, he's the techie guy behind everything. And I'd just like to finish on, not that one. Skip the slide, sorry. I know I'm close to time, but I'll be quick. So we all know this information, why it's so important to have data, why this is a critical decade for coral reefs, and why we need to sort of act now and protect and support. And I'm saying all of this and we've heard about bleaching, the fourth global bleaching event, stony coral tissue loss disease. This is all sort of on the backdrop of we've just had further information that all of the Lesser Antilles is in alert level 5 for Coral Reef Watch, which is catastrophic. And there's already bleaching in Belize, UVI, and San Juan. So this year is going to be tough and hotter than last year. But why I like to show this and why we need an additional report is this is the global coral cover from 2020. We can see here a little bit of hope maybe that the coral cover started to slightly go up. We don't know if that's an artifact of a certain number of surveys or if it's actually what we're seeing in the field. So we need to extend these data to understand if we've continued on an upward trajectory, if we've plateaued, so we're halting loss, or are we continuing on a downward trend? And we all know what's happening with the fourth global bleaching event, stony core tissue loss disease, etc., etc. So we need more data. We need this report to inform all of those that are negotiating around the tax to ensure that we have strong action for coral reefs moving forward. And with that being said, please scan the QR codes and send me data. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom, and I will invite all the presenters up on the stage now, and Tom to bring Dr. Davis to join us. And we welcome Kendon to the stage as well. Kendon is the technical officer with the Windward Islands Research and Environmental Foundation, or WINREF. As I mentioned, he is a education foundation. What did I say? WINREF. He is a EBA grantee. So we won't be able to get his full presentation, but you can keep the mic for the 3-minute version of your 3 messages that you wanted us, 3 key messages that you wanted us to know today, Kendon.
So good morning, everyone. Right, so my apologies for my tardiness. I had some issues with the time displaying on my phone. I'm still apparently back in Grenada. But the key messages I pretty much wanted to highlight was that community engagement is super important in dealing with issues of coral reef restoration. We have been working with a local community on the east of Grenada. Grenada is a small island within the Caribbean, and we're just pretty much over 344 square kilometers. So pretty small. What we've seen happen is that there's been a lot of impacts on the coral reef, mainly due to hurricanes. Back in 2004, we had Hurricane Ivan. We also had the blasting of the reef in that area to widen the channel for trade, and that was in 1979 thereabout. And that has actually had significant impact on the coastal environments. In fact, there were areas where we had roughly less than a meter of erosion close to the main road on the eastern side, and that's the main road that's take you from the northern side all the way down to the south of the island. So the project was definitely needed, and we definitely delivered in that regard. What we've seen happen as well is that strengthening the coastal communities, teaching them, or in other words, collaborating, I should say, because they actually knew quite a bit more than I did in some cases. So it was a learning exchange for the most part, but collaborating with them, getting their trust, which was super important. We tend to see that they actually had the drive to actually push things further than the project actually allowed. So as we know, projects do have set timelines, which have their endpoints because of their finances and stuff like that. But the community was actually willing to do monitoring past our project timeline. And we then saw it fit to actually apply for other grants to continue that initiative. What we also saw is that coral diversity when doing restoration is super important, and not focusing on one particular species. In our approach, we focus mainly on 4 different species. That's the Acropora palmata, Pseudodiploria clivosa, Poraites, and Poraites asteroides. And we did find some bleaching, well, heavy bleaching, with the Acropora palmata. In fact, it was completely wiped out, 100% mortality. However, with the Pseudodiploria clivosa, we saw some success there, and we're actually trying to see how best we can actually isolate some genetic material from that. So that would be our second phase in this new project. And also with that, we actually, that particular species, or that particular genet of Pseudodiploria clivosa, it actually survived both the 2023 bleaching and is actually surviving the bleaching that is currently ongoing today. So we have high hopes for that species, and we're looking forward to doing some more work in that community. Thank you.
Thank you, and you can have a seat and that mic will be for the panel. So let me open the floor for continuing questions and discussions from the audience to the panel that's here with us. On any of the topics that were raised or any issues or comments in your own experience. If not, I can start with some. I'll keep asking.
I'll keep asking questions. So I'm a science communicator at the Smithsonian, and I think one of the issues for us is how do we bridge the gap so that we actually arrive with the scientific information that is correct, but also explain it in a way that the local communities understand it. And we just did a release this morning about hypoxia, and that might be one of the main killers of varieties of some of the main of the stagborn pearls, which is not it's Acropora, sorry. So yeah, my question is what tone do you think we could use, or how best could we reach local communities, say, if we want to try to stop coastal pollution? What kind of information do we need to share?
So since Cameron has my technique, you can start.
I think for us, we mainly target the persons who have the most power in terms of those who either directly pollute or those who interact with the space on a daily basis. I think it's very important to know the audience, know their language. And what we've been doing is really trying to show how their actions impact their livelihoods. So in speaking with a fisherman, I like to actually highlight the aspects of, hey, this is actually how it's going to actually impact the money you're going to bring in. It's you're going to get less fish. And we have seen some changes in terms of showing their oil bottles outside of the boat. They actually now keep it inside of the boat and then throw it on the in the garbage bin. We also have been working with them in terms of the close seasons. In fact, they have been some of the biggest campaigners for enforcing some of the close seasons within that space, not necessarily Grenada, because people hunt outside of those seasons regardless. But within the Subies area, they've been championing cause and saying, hey guys, you need to do better than that. And I think also reinforcing the point of indigenous knowledge is actually useful, because they've been doing things that actually protect that ecosystem for years in terms of rotating grounds and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to actually have knowledge sharing, and that way we can actually all speak the same language.
So maybe it's not so much the science, but how it affects them.
Yes.
What about, I don't know if anybody wants to comment specifically on government, them understanding the science.
Yes, I can chip in here.
Communities, okay. Sorry, babe.
So if you don't mind, I'll let Dr. Davis go ahead.
Yeah, in
Go
response to the earlier question, for you to engage the local communities from an international organization, in my experience, we have a few barriers. The first is we often don't have access to data that international organizations have collected about our countries that might be housed behind paywalls or some other access barrier. So while you're at an international institute, everything should be made available, particularly to those organizations and universities that are working in the country. So you can reach out to the University of the Bahamas to let us know what data you have about our countries. That would allow us to then integrate it into our curricula, and even to encourage our students or our researchers in country to continue collecting data in that same vein, so that the data would match up and be able to be compared. The next thing is we have information about our own countries that we have housed in different spaces, but with your resources, you may want to access those or make those available to a broader range of stakeholders. through your website. So for example, we translated the Care for the Coral Reef video series from Puerto Rico into Bahamian English. And so our students in country, our primary school students, can see a talking shrimp, a banded coral shrimp, telling them about the environment in their own vernacular and connect a little bit more. Or you have our ecosystem book that was made by Friends of the Environment here in Abaco, and it's really talking about these ecosystem and environmental issues, but the images are not about, elephants and crown of thorns starfish that we don't have here in the Bahamas. They're about our corals, our fish, our birds that a student can see it in the book and then walk outside and see it in the real world. I think that connection is something that's been missing. And to engage with the governments, many of the international partners give funding into the governments, but there is no requirement in that for engaging with, making sure that there are university students on the project, making sure that there are 2 or 3 mandatory presentations within the university setting or within high school or youth settings. And that keeps it away from the public sector, and many people don't know what the government is doing, what visiting researchers are doing because of that. And so I think those are some small ways that can very quickly change access.
Thank you very much. See, please go ahead.
So we're answering both pieces the same. So I think faith-based leaders are really good about getting information out to people. We've done that in Honduras, and we currently have projects in Baltimore working with faith-based groups that are doing restoration, and it's how you get the science in to that when people are already leading it and they are the voice of the people and they can translate the science to their general audience. And then the other piece is, and I completely agree with my friend in the Bahamas there, of bringing, like when we go to work in any of the countries that we're in, we sit down with the governments, but we also bring in all of the different departments of the government and hopefully work with the different technicians there and also bring in the university. So oftentimes it's amplifying their voices that they're already saying the right things, but sometimes their own governments don't listen to them. And it actually is that balance between who says what when, but making sure that we're actually working together and that we're seen as a unified group, not as we've come in, we know everything, but it is, they know all of this stuff. We've had a look over and we 100% agree with what they've just said, and they just put it in a different way. So I think a lot of the governments as well, it's that, and it's making sure that you're a group united that come together to talk through those issues.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point. See,
I'm just gonna add something. I agree completely with my colleagues just said that one of the things that I've been doing, especially here, like in is reaching out like journalists and people that actually will know how to communicate science and sit down with them and talk like, hey, I have all this data, I have all this information, and just get things, especially on the newspapers or on the news, that go to all the kind of public that is not like only local communities, but people from the country. So I think that that is another thing that we need to approach, because we need everyone to know about what is happening and the potential consequences.
thank you. And we have a question here, and I'm happy to pick up my old boss. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to all the panelists. My name is Yago Batista. I'm the director of the UN Global Fund for Coral Reefs. This question is for Tom and Steve. Steve, before the event, we were talking about the mangrove breakthrough and the connections among the breakthroughs. So based on what you have been discussing on the science aspects and the connections between these two very much associated ecosystems, I wanted to get your perspectives on how these two breakthroughs can and should work together. And having said all this, we are a supporter, of course, of the coral breakthrough. We work with ICRI a lot on developing it. But at the same time, all of our programs under the GFCR, they include actions on mangroves as well, and developing financial mechanisms that are linked to both mangrove and coral reef conservation. So we'd like to hear your perspective on this.
An easy one. There's also the seagrass breakthrough too, right, which is up and coming. And I think this is where all of them have these protection, management, and restoration goals. And it's how do we actually put them in the same place so that we're not conserving a coral over here, 100 kilometers down the coastline, we're doing something with a mangrove, and then 2 miles offshore, we're doing something with seagrass. It's actually, is there a way that we can talk and find out who's doing what where and actually bring those groups together? Because it will be groups like when we're with Ancilleno, who will be doing this work. And so it's critical that we have the same priority areas as we go through so that we know the locations of this work so that we're not doing it in different areas. And I think being able to then channel those finances well from those 3 areas or from one area into a project that has those 3 ecosystems, and it will be critical. Does that answer it better?
Thanks, I think Tom was also.
Thanks, Trevor. I will try my best. I absolutely agree with what Steve was saying. I think all the mangrove, all the breakthrough, sorry, are in slightly different stages. I think the mangrove is more further forward in the breakthrough, and so then we've got the seagrass breakthrough sort of coming through. And I think that the value in that is that, for example, from the coral reef breakthroughs point of view, we're preparing IGP governing sort of procedure, but we're also from that we'll develop the monitoring and evaluation framework and how we track the coral reef breakthrough. So I think what the stage that we're at the moment will allow us to pull in the need for those linkages in collaboration with the mangrove breakthrough, with the seagrass breakthrough, whether we build in specific indicators that overlap so we can sort of monitor that sort of dual or triple impact between them. But then also when we look to support or sort of disperse those funding, that we can collaborate and speak with the mangrove breakthrough, speak with the seagrass breakthrough to see where they are also supporting activities, to see if there's added value, sort of, and I think maybe you mentioned like economies of scale, like rather than funding in 3 different places, if we can sort of focus funding in a particular place, that essentially the mangrove breakthrough has already built that foundation, then we can sort of add to that with coral reef funding and then potentially with seagrass funding. So it's a bit of a roundabout answer, but I think where we are at the moment, we have opportunities. Just waiting what you're going to say next.
No, it's just a comment. I think I fully agree with what you said. What I would add to that is that as we move forward on the conversations among the breakthroughs, let's also look at who are those common partners that we are all supporting, and then focus on those common partners as well as we identify these priority sites and we identify the common KPIs. So, thanks.
And I think there's a very valuable point there from what Fabian had in his slides, and maybe Fabian, you're going to talk about it, but I was surprised at how many that ICRI was second in the sort of composition of sort of partners with the CBF. So there's major overlap, and I think sometimes we're in our own little silos and don't really talk to each other, and then you see something on the screen, you go, yeah, we're probably repeating things, so we need to talk a bit more as well.
And maybe to add one thing, I guess, Mike, the idea as well of and I think Dr. Davis mentioned it's the donors at the bigger level. So, they're the obvious countries and states that have the funding and the ability to do the research on coral reefs. The island states have a little more of a challenge and need a little more funding and support, and even don't have the same volume of possibility just because we are operating as islands. So again, what we can do as regional entities across the region in terms of work on coral reefs and mangroves as well is going to be important. And then very quickly in terms of the applicants that we saw, they have a sense because coral reefs was first and mangroves was second in terms of the major areas that they asked for funding for from the EBA facility. So the NGO sector, the partners that we are working with have some ideas and information that we really do need to tap into. Sorry, Fabian.
Thanks. Yeah, I just have a very quick comment, and I think it's really around collective action, how key that is. Steve mentioned in his presentation about thinking about the seek state levels, making sure that it's connected, because of course, what do you do in the rivers affects the reefs, and there's this root which one of the things, as you were speaking about coral breakthrough and seagrass, and none of that is connected. It's also to look at sort of holistic or holistic coastal zone, so in the integrated coastal zone management. So I know a lot of focus right now on this, the countries that are updating their these apps. They're going through, or different countries are at different levels in terms of their marine spatial planning and how it fits into the GBF objectives and studying phase as part of that conversation. So I think it's really important to include these pieces in this overall conversation. So that's really just
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi. Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to add that there's a really good initiative through the Inter-American Development Bank where they've made a big push for transparency in their funding so that when the government of our country accepts funding from them, all the partners in country will know what project is being done, where it's being done, who's the implementer, and how much funding was being accessed. Because of that kind of black box, often we don't know about these activities until after the government has kind of chosen who should be a part of it and things like that. And often the government or the parties that are in office, they may have particular ways that they want that funding to be used that doesn't necessarily align with what the scientific community in the country or the local conservation practitioners think would be best. And I think that just transparency in itself is a major support system for conservation success. And when you have the community knowing what is going on, then we can either align forces or we can guide the projects to be more applicable or to synergize with the other work that we're doing. So I think all of us can do more with transparency. And I'm happy to communicate with anyone who's interested in seeing what that looks like, at least in the Bahamas.
Hi, my name is Lina. My question is more Thomas. You were showing that Colombia is not sending enough data. And it comes a bit with the question before about communication. And is how you are communicating to get the data from who. I am Colombian. I didn't know about this. And I want to know how people can get involved and from who you are expecting data and what kind of data.
Perfect, thank you very much, and sorry to hear that you weren't aware of this call. And one key thing that I missed out was that the GCRMN is operational through 10 regional nodes, which cover all the major ocean basins and sort of a distribution of shallow water coral reefs. And Colombia sits between two regions of the GCRMN. You've got the Caribbean side, but then you've also got the Eastern Tropical Pacific side. Each are governed slightly differently. They have a different governance procedure. But the Caribbean is quite active. It has a steering committee and representatives from each country. And because they're doing their regional report, they're quite active at the moment. So I'm quite surprised that you haven't been informed of that. Not to worry, we can chat after and I can give you all the details, so it's all good. And then from the Eastern Tropical Pacific side, again, they're not doing regional report, but we're working with their regional coordinators to ensure that contributors in the country are aware. So obviously that message isn't coming all the way through. So we need to sort of have a think about how to better sort of communicate that. From ICRI's perspective, we advertise social media, etc. through our focal points. Colombia is a member of ICRI, so that information should have also trickled down as well. And just typically in terms of the actual data, we're looking at benthic data, benthic composition from coral reef monitoring, from intercept, line intercept, photogrammetrics, etc. It can be provided in any format, and then Jeremy will work his magic, standardize everything, and then you send it back, and we can sign a data sharing agreement if needed, and I can provide you with summary.
I was thinking more like in the community, not the scientific, community, but if you.
The local community,
Local communities, and if they can add data or value to the report.
Yeah, absolutely. We will accept any data as long as it's coral reef monitoring data. We're not accepting data on restoration sites because that will increase noise, etc. But yeah, any data that's there, you're more than welcome to send it. Jeremy will always check it if there's any issues and let you know. But yeah, any data, anything's possible. And maybe my question to you is there something we can do better to communicate with local communities to ensure the message gets there so they can contribute their data? And I'm happy to work with you on that to provide you with necessary information.
Thank you. Okay.
So maybe why you haven't heard about this is usually the ICRI and everything goes through the Ministry of Environment and Commerce. So we don't, if we are not part of that, that's why we don't get anything, any impact or anything. So it's more into through the government.
So government and maybe non-government. Point.
Yeah, that would be like
So-
creating one.
Interesting. All right, so I'm pleased to follow up with Tom. There's a question here and then I start on you.
Sorry, mine might be a slightly long-winded question, but Margot from the International Coral Reef Initiative. I work alongside Tom, so it's very nice to have you all in the pavilion, and thank you very much for your presentations. Mine's just a bit of a general question, but I'm hearing a lot more about scalability and affordability when it comes to coral reefs. So how do you envision the strategies you're implementing being scaled effectively and made affordable for broader application to achieve global targets for resilient reefs? And how do you think international organizations such as ICRI can help support this? So that sort of goes to you, Tom.
The second part. So I think it's actually a good question for us to get some final thoughts from our panelists as well. Are there any other questions in the room? Let's see if I see any hands. So if you, in answering, would just give us your final thoughts and maybe a challenge or two to the room for what's next.
Yeah, like the main challenge that we have, everyone that is doing any kind of restoration, especially in coral reefs, it's how to scale them. We are working to try to do more collaborations with other people, like especially engineers, that they may know how to approach that kind of things. And there are many things happening at the moment. So we do use right now two main methods, right? That is like coral fragmentation, that is sexual, and then larval propagation. So we are working with those strategies to try to scale it up. It's going to take time, but I do think that in the next decade, if we succeed and we have still coral reefs, I do think that we will be doing, but there is a lot of research in different areas, and I do think that we will do it, but right now we're still in a really small scale. There are really good successes like fragments of protein release that I think that is the best one, and they have been able to do it, but it's the only thing that they do, and that's something that is.
Scaling, we need our communities, and we need it to be that it's not just science boffins coming down and doing things, or local scientists or whoever. It is, how do communities share their experiences on a large project, maybe the Kingdom or whoever has been doing, but it goes mouth to mouth and it doesn't have to be formal. And I think taking some of the formality out of the trainings helps. And then OECMs need to be driven hard and really accepted onto the table, because that community base with community knowledge, with some science of Western style sort of sprinkled on top, will be the way to do it. But I think the other way to finance that will be making sure that these breakthroughs come together, because I think combined we're asking for over $30 billion, and if that happens, then there will actually be some funding out there that will allow for that scalability. So how do we get private sector involved? How do we get governments in? And then making sure that that money gets to the right areas.
I think we need to be adaptive. So things are changing all the time in terms of the environment we're working in, the ecosystems. So there needs to be opportunity, or we need to be agile in terms of how we approach things, and that also comes from funding. So we can't just rely on, although grants are extremely important, we need to look at the financing mechanisms and finance, and we need to make sure that resources are available to the communities on the ground implementing these projects, and that there is connectivity between them.
Good day again. Some aspects I think we can actually put forward as collaboration among various organizations, and that's regional collaboration in that case, because there are some cases where you may want to get into, because we do microfragmentation, which is the asexual aspect. But let's say if we want to get into the sexual reproduction, we shouldn't go ahead and try to reinvent the wheel. We should reach out to partners who are already going through it, already face some of the challenges and have some solutions, so we can actually far advance in our approach. Also targeting or tackling some of the silent killers to coral reef. So when we talk about silent kills, we're talking water quality, we're talking pollution, we're also talking overfishing and anchor damage, and also doing a proper assessment to know what we actually have within our waters. Because there are some corals that are actually thermophilic to old bleaching aspect, and if we don't assess what's there, we don't know what we have until it's gone. So these are the few points I just want to leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Ancilleno?
Yes, I think one of the major problems to our scaling, especially in the Bahamas, is the personnel cost and the logistics costs. So for us to get people to different islands in our island nation, we have 700 islands, right? And then the people on those islands would not be trained, or they would not be familiar with what the purposes are. For us, education is the most scalable avenue to coral reef conservation. Having more people on the different islands that understand the risk to the coral reefs, that can identify a coral that is bleaching or that may have one of the many coral diseases that affect our corals. Students that we have sprinkled throughout the nation who can do reef check or IGRA surveys. These are the most important aspects of what we do, I think. And when we go to a different island, instead of having 5 really highly trained visiting scientists traveling in a boat from island to island once a year, we can have the local community members who, every time they go into the water to snorkel, to scuba dive, to fish or spearfish, they're looking at these corals and they're looking at the reefs and the fish communities, and they can point out when something is going wrong because they use it and they have that passion. So I think education is definitely one of the key ways that we can do it. In country, we have organizations like the Bahamas Reef Environment Educational Foundation, Friends of the Environment, the Bahamas National Trust, and they're all doing education in different ways in different islands. And their supporters and their members and their students are the ones who are really having major impact on the ground and changing the way things are. So I would say that education, a mix of formal and informal education, is the most scalable tool that we can use right now.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. I'll be super quick because the next group will be coming through, and me and Margot will have a conversation because that wasn't the question we were asked. No, just super quickly, I'll just say sort of three things. Where international initiatives can help is sort of connect the dots to allow organizations, initiatives to have conversations, as you were saying, to not reinvent the wheel, but also talk about failures, learn from those failures, but also share stories of success. And then we can be sort of that accelerator to help sort of rapidly scale up these initiatives in the most effective and cost-effective manner, but all together, rather than again go back to those individual silos and trying everybody to save the world at once. We'll sort of do it all together in education and et cetera is critical. So thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And maybe I will end with the story of how we got to the Coral Health Initiative that you've heard mentioned by Fabian, which is the first and second calls under the EBA facility had a range of coral restoration requests and ideas. And all the proposals were great, and it included sexual, asexual, in Cuba, in other countries, each of them very much doing their own thing and thinking their thing was the best thing, and that's why we should fund it. Of course, that's how you write proposals, but also, how do you then make that Caribbean wide? How do you, I mentioned Cuba specifically, but you know, how do we get the information and what they're doing to other countries? So we've been pushing that. The work that we've done, for example, in Cuba is also, we were able to have them in the Dominican Republic, and it's been, those kinds of collaborations have been good. But that really is where a lot of the thinking came from, that everybody has ideas and are working, but we really have to figure out how we do it together. So with that, first let me thank Ikri, Margot in particular, who is our main coordinator for all of this, but to be here in the pavilion with you and to do the work, Tom, who you saw doing everything, including speaking, and the rest of our panelists for being with us today. And Ancilleno, who looks like he's very ready to go in the field, so we're all very jealous because we're all going to another meeting. But thank you all very much, and thank you all for being a part of it. Please do follow up with any of our panelists going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.